Hi, how you doing? Justin here, and today we are going to be talking about how to use your blues licks effectively. This is a pretty big deal if you're just getting into your blues lead guitar, because these little tips, they can make a pretty massive difference. So the first thing that you want to be thinking about when you're doing your lick practice is a little bit of space, okay? Don't feel that you have to talk all the time. Punctuation and having little gaps in your sentences is a really big deal, and as a beginner guitar player it gives you a bit of a chance to breathe and think about what you're doing. Now long term you don't want to think, okay? You have to try and practice all your licks and everything so it's instinctive and it just comes out by itself, so you can start to hear it. It becomes a bit more spiritual kind of thing, right? But at the beginning stages you're going to have to do some thinking. You're going to have to think about your licks, you're thinking about bending in tune and all that kind of stuff, right? So don't be afraid of a bit of space. And space, when you start out, can feel like a terribly long time, even though it isn't. If you can record yourself, that'll kind of bite that one. But we'll talk about that again in a second. But the idea would be to just play a lick and then stop for a second. A good way is to try and take your hand off the fingerboard, right? Just because it'll force you to have a decent kind of a gap. Okay, a long enough gap. Otherwise you might play a lick and think that you've left a gap and you haven't really. It's a very common thing is that I'll do an exercise like this with a student and they don't really leave any gaps, but they think they are, right? The really big deal is it gives you a chance to think about what you're going to do next. So you might play your lick and go 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4. Okay, taking the hand off gives you a chance to get to and think about your licks a little bit more, okay? Those little gaps are a really nice length. That was nearly a bar that I was kind of thinking there. In between, 1, 2, 3, 4, ba-ba-da-ba-da. 1, 2, 3, 4, diggity whatever, okay? But the idea of having that big gap in between the licks is really, really important. It actually sounds cool. One of the things that a lot of the great guitar players have is a bit of space. It makes your playing sound more mature and more composed kind of thing, more relaxed, because I think there's a thing about talking too much and talking too fast when you get nervous. So if you're feeling a bit tense and panicky, you're likely to blurt all your licks out and they won't really have a nice time feel, and it'll all just be a little bit awkward sounding, which isn't nice for the listener. Listeners want to hear you sounding all relaxed and cool, not in a bit of a panic, okay? And using some space can really, really help that. So that's thing number one. Don't be afraid of space. Try and leave gaps. If you have trouble leaving enough gaps, then try and take your hand off in between. Second thing, which was kind of tied into that, is recording yourself. Now, recording yourself is a fantastic thing to do, right? Software where you can import an MP3 and then jam over the top of it is quite freely available now. You can do it in GarageBand. I know there's ones for PC. I just can't think of what they are because I don't use a PC, but I'll put some links on the website to great recording. A lot of them are completely free as well. I should point out, you don't have to be spending a lot to be able to do this, but having a 12-bar blues backing track and then practicing your licks over the top of it and then listening back to your improvising is a really great thing to be doing. It'll give you a lot of hints like, oh, your bending's not in tune, or your timing's really not very good, or maybe it's like, wow, I'm as good as Eric Clapton, okay? It doesn't have to always be negative stuff. Sometimes recording yourself back can be a really positive experience because you get, it's like, yeah, you know, all that practice I've been doing, I'm kind of getting this together. It's sounding pretty good, right? But all of us have things that we got to work on. I still, every time I record myself and listen back, I'm thinking, could work on that, should improve that. You know, later on it's about trying not to play some licks, because you'll find that the licks that you really like tend to fall out accidentally a bit too much. So when I'm improvising in blues, particularly in a blues form, I have to deliberately stop myself from playing some licks sometimes, you know, because I find that gets a little bit over the top. So recording yourself is really incredible, you know, vibrato and string bending, that kind of stuff. You know, if your vibrato's no good and you listen back to yourself, you're going to be like, oh yeah, well, that's really, really not happening. But if you, you know, or it might be great. You might be like, yeah, I've nailed that vibrato. I might have a look at a different vibrato. String bending, is your bending in tune? Are you using enough spaces? Does it seem to tell a story when you play guitar? How many licks have you got? Are you repeating licks too much, or have you got a nice vocabulary? Or maybe you're not repeating licks enough. Maybe you're just doing each lick once and it sounds like a random collection of licks. Because one of those things about playing an improvisation, or like telling a story, if you like, or a poem with your words, is that quite often you're going to be using similar words all the time. You know, I've just noticed myself using the word words, okay? Because we're talking about language and licks, which are words. So it makes sense if I'm giving you a little talk about using the language, the word words is going to come up kind of often. Right? So if I tried to speak to you and never use the same word twice, that would be pretty difficult, right? Very difficult, if not impossible. Okay? So when you're doing an improvisation, don't feel like you have to use different words, different licks all of the way through. That would be bad. Okay? You need to use a kind of a balance between repeated licks and new licks. And again, great way of kind of sussing this out is listening to the great guitar players that you really like. Okay? Because we all have different favorites, okay? Nearly everyone likes Stevie Ray Vaughan, maybe there's an exception. So go and grab a Stevie Ray Vaughan record and have a listen to a solo and see how many times you can hear the same lick or the same phrase get used, okay? Sometimes it'll be quite often, sometimes it won't be much at all. With Stevie, he tends to use this thing called a thread. So he'll copy like a rhythm again. So he'll play one lick and he'll take the rhythm of that lick and use that in another lick, but with the same rhythm. So there's other approaches to this, right? But just be aware of your licks and what you're playing and your vibrato and your string bending, and all of that stuff is best done by recording yourself. It really makes a big difference. If you just leave it to yourself to judge it while you're playing, very rarely will you get an accurate picture of what it really sounds like, okay? Because remember, the listener hears not just what you do, but what you do over the backing track or with the band. Okay? It's really important that you understand that's what they hear. So that's what you should be listening to judge it, not how it feels, because very often it doesn't feel very good, but actually it is good. And other times it's the other way. You'll feel like it's really fantastic and listen back and go, ooh, nah, you know. So that's important. The last thing that I want to mention to you for effective practice in the blues style is trying to put some emotion into it. Now I know this gets into real kind of hairy fairyland a little bit, and it's kind of difficult to explain, but what I'd recommend that you do is have a go at, just pick one or two licks and a backing track that you like, and then try and tap into some sort of really strong emotion that you've got. You know, when your little bunny died when you were 6 or whatever, if that was a very strong emotion for you and you can still bring that up and start to feel sad, then do that. And I'm obviously taking the mickey out of the bunny thing, but maybe it's, I don't know, serious stuff like your friend died or your parents breaking up, or, you know, some heavy duty stuff, right? Whatever stuff that you've got in there that's really seriously affecting your psyche, see if you can think about that while you play and put that through what you're playing. Right? Now this is a pretty big deal. It's trying to help you make the connection between the emotional side and the playing side. And it can be a pretty powerful thing. Okay? This isn't just to muck around. This is kind of how it steps up to be a bit more real. Okay, it can be a little bit scary and a little bit uncomfortable for some people, especially if you've got a lot of baggage, right? A lot of skeletons in the closet that want to come out and scare you, right? But it can be a really powerful release as well. If you're feeling stressed or you've got some sort of problems going on, being able to express that through the instrument can be an incredible relief and really do powerful things to your playing as well, because it really takes it to that next level when you feel like you're expressing something. Well, when you feel like you're expressing something, you really are expressing something. Okay? So it's whether other people can connect with what you're expressing, and that becomes pretty heavy, right? But that's really where it's at. But beyond all of that stuff is trying to find, you know, people talking about, if we talk about the language analogy about licks being words and words coming together to make short stories or poetry or whatever. You know, poetry affects people, it connects with people, and it's pretty powerful, and it's normally expressing a very powerful emotion. So the sooner you can tap into that and try and find an outlet to be able to express those things, it can really make a serious impact in your playing. I've seen a few students get, you know, within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of trying that as an exercise about trying to put some emotion into it, really making some pretty massive steps. So maybe you will too. Like I said, it can be a bit uncomfortable, but that's but it can be also massively relieving at the same time. So it's definitely something to give a shot to. And the last thing I'm going to mention as well, I'm going to put a few set solos up on the website for you to do with this lesson as well. So what these are going to be is just example ideas of how you might put the licks together to make a solo. Okay, now I'm not going to play them for you because I think it's better for you to interpret it how you like, because it's not supposed to be set in stone. It's just an idea for you to try out. If you're feeling like, oh, I'm not really sure where to go, it's still not feeling good, then here's an example to try. And just see how you get along with that, and then feel free to change it up as much as you like, because the idea is for you to be making an improvisation. I think it's helpful for some people to have a kind of a template to start off from, that then they can kind of merge and colour in themselves to make it their own. So I hope that wasn't too heavy, and that it really helps you effectively practice your licks and get yourself into proper full-on improvisation mode, because it's so much fun when you can tap that stuff, man, to feeling like no other. And I think it's really powerful and a fantastic thing, and I'm sure you'll enjoy being able to tap into that stuff. So anyway, have fun with it if that's the right expression, and I'll see you for plenty more lessons very soon. You take care of yourselves. Bye bye.